The air in the classroom seemed to vibrate with anticipation as the students of Earth's premier interspecies educational initiative took their seats. Nate Harlow slouched in his chair at the back, dark curls falling over his eyes as he sketched absently in his notebook. At 19, he was one of the oldest humans in the advanced xenobiology program, the only one who'd earned a spot through a scholarship rather than family connections. They say she's alluvian, whispered Fiona, the freckled girl beside him. They can read minds. Nate rolled his eyes. That's Altuvians. Alluvians have bioluminescent skin patterns, and they definitely can't read minds. The door slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, and every human boy in the room, previously slouched in various states of disinterest, straightened as if pulled by invisible strings. Professor Karani entered with the fluid grace of a dancer. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, her slender form moved with hypnotic elegance. Her skin, a canvas of deep indigo, was adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed softly with inner light, shifting from azure to violet as she surveyed the classroom. Her eyes, entirely silver without pupils, somehow managed to convey both warmth and authority. "Good morning," she said, her voice resonating with musical undertones that human vocal cords could never produce. "I am Professor Karani, your new xenobiology instructor." Nate felt his pulse quicken. He'd seen alluvians in holovids and passing in the halls of the Academy, but never this close. Their species had only joined the Galactic Assembly 3 Earth years ago, making them among the newest members of interstellar society. "Dude," breathed Marcus, the Academy quarterback who'd never once shown interest in academics, "I'm actually going to attend every class." "Is attendance not mandatory at this institution?" Professor Karani asked, her head tilting slightly as the patterns on her neck flashed briefly with golden light. Marcus turned crimson. Yes, ma'am, I just meant." "He means he's looking forward to learning from you," Nate interjected, surprising himself with his own boldness. Professor Karani's attention shifted to him, and Nate felt his face grow warm under her silvery gaze. "And you are?" "Nate Harlow, Professor." "Mr. Harlow, a pleasure." The patterns on her forearms briefly pulsed turquoise. "Your species has a rich history of biological adaptation. I hope you'll contribute that perspective to our discussions." She turned to the holographic display at the front of the room, summoning a three-dimensional model of a double helix DNA strand intertwined with something more complex, alien genetics. "Today we begin with comparative genomics, the basis for all advanced xenobiological studies." Nate couldn't look away, not just because of her otherworldly beauty, though that certainly commanded attention, but because of the passion evident in her movements as she manipulated the holographic structures, expanding sections to highlight key differences between Earth's genetic code and that of other worlds. "The question we must ask," she continued, "is not how we differ, but why our genetic structures evolved with such remarkable similarities despite developing on worlds light years apart." For the next hour, she challenged them with concepts that stretched beyond conventional Earth science, introducing frameworks that required them to think outside their human perspectives. Even the most restless students sat transfixed. After class, as the others filed out, Nate lingered, studying the complex models still rotating in the air. "You have questions, Mr. Harlow?" Professor Karani asked, her voice gentler than it had been during the lecture. "Just curious about something," he said. "The protein folding pattern you showed, it suggests a connection between alluvian and Earth reptilian DNA. That can't be coincidence." A subtle shift in her luminescence from indigo to a deeper purple crossed her skin. Perceptive, most first-year students wouldn't catch that. She studied him with those brilliant silver eyes. "Perhaps you'd like to assist me with some research. I find human perspectives invaluable." "I'd be honored," Nate replied, trying to sound professional despite the flutter in his chest. As he left the classroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind her invitation, something in the way her bioluminescence had shifted when their eyes met. And why would an advanced alluvian scientist need help from a human student? What he didn't know then was that Professor Karani's arrival marked the beginning of something far more complex than an academic semester. Something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about alien biology and his own heart. 3 weeks into the semester, Professor Karani's class had become legendary across campus. Attendance was perfect, unheard of for any course at the academy, and students from other disciplines tried to sneak in just to witness her teaching. Nate arrived early, as had become his habit, finding Professor Karani arranging crystalline containers on her desk. Inside each, various Earth specimens floated in a clear solution: flower petals, insect wings, and what appeared to be small tissue samples. Good morning, Mr. Harlow, she said without looking up, the patterns across her shoulders pulsing with soft amber light. Punctual as always. What are those for? He asked, setting down his bag and approaching her desk. Her silver eyes met his. Today's lesson on cellular adaptation. Your Earth life demonstrates remarkable resilience. She lifted one container where a simple leaf appeared to be slowly regenerating its damaged edges. Fascinating, isn't it? Before Nate could respond, Marcus strode in with his usual entourage. His posture noticeably improved since the beginning of the term. Professor K, did you get a chance to review my thesis proposal? He'd never shown such enthusiasm for any academic pursuit before Professor Karani's arrival. I did, Mr. Westfield. Your comparative analysis of Terran and non-Terran respiratory systems shows promise, though your conclusions require further evidence. The patterns on her forearms flickered with a gentle blue. Perhaps Mr. Harlow could assist you with the biological markers section. Marcus shot Nate a look that mixed jealousy with grudging respect. Everyone had noticed how Professor Karani had taken Nate under her wing, requesting his help with various research tasks after hours. As the classroom filled, Nate took his seat, observing how different the atmosphere had become. Fiona's hand was always raised now, her questions growing more insightful. Even Daryl, who had barely passed any previous courses, was engaged and participating. Today, Professor Karani announced, we explore biological adaptation through direct experience. Her skin rippled with emerald patterns as she dimmed the lights. Watch closely. The bioluminescent patterns across her skin began to shift, not just in color but in arrangement, until they matched the exact pattern of light and shadow in the room. It was as if parts of her had become invisible. Alluvian adaptive camouflage, she explained, her voice echoing slightly in the darkened room. An evolutionary response to the predator species on our world. Your own species has similar adaptations, though less dramatic. The class watched, mesmerized, as she demonstrated the full range of her biological capabilities, changing not just her skin's luminescence but its apparent texture and color. Now, she said, restoring the lights, who can explain the genetic foundations for such adaptations? Nate raised his hand, speaking with a confidence he hadn't possessed before her class. It's not just genetics, it's environmentally responsive epigenetics. Your cells are constantly reading and reacting to your surroundings, like Earth chameleons but on a cellular level. Professor Karani's skin briefly flashed with bright magenta, a color Nate had never seen from her before. Excellent, Mr. Harlow, and what might be the evolutionary advantage of such sensitivity? Survival, obviously, interjected Marcus, but also communication. Indeed, her patterns settled into a steady rhythm of deep blue. On Alluvia, our earliest ancestors used bioluminescence not just for camouflage, but to communicate complex emotions without sound, which could attract predators. After class, as students filed out discussing the captivating lesson, Professor Karani asked Nate to stay behind. Your insights today were particularly valuable, she said, collecting her specimens. Would you be available to assist me this evening? I'm conducting field research in the Arboretum. Of course, Nate replied, perhaps too quickly. As he headed to his next class, Fiona caught up with him. You're spending a lot of time with her, she observed, her tone concerned. Don't you think it's strange how many samples she's collecting, and have you noticed she's always on campus after midnight? She's a researcher, Nate defended, and from a nocturnal species. Maybe, Fiona replied skeptically. But yesterday I saw her entering the restricted biochemistry lab, the one with the planetary quarantine protocols. Nate frowned. She probably has clearance. Without any Academy security escorts, that's against regulation for all non-Earth species. Fiona squeezed his arm. Just be careful, okay? You look at her like she's the center of the universe. I do not, he protested, but the heat in his face betrayed him. That evening, as darkness fell over the Academy grounds, Nate made his way to the Arboretum. Through the glass dome, stars glittered above the carefully maintained ecosystem of Earth's most precious plant species. Professor Karani stood beneath a flowering cherry tree, her skin glowing softly in the darkness, illuminating the falling blossoms around her with otherworldly light. For a moment, Nate simply watched, entranced by the sight. She turned, sensing his presence. Mr. Harlow, thank you for coming. Nate, he said, when we're not in class, I'd prefer if you called me Nate. The patterns on her neck fluttered with that same magenta hue he'd seen earlier. Very well, Nate, she gestured to a collection of equipment. Tonight, we study how Earth flora respond to non-terrestrial stimuli. As they worked side by side, Nate couldn't help but notice how her movements seemed to follow a pattern, collecting samples, scanning them, extracting something, then storing the data in a device he didn't recognize as standard Academy equipment. When their hands accidentally touched as they both reached for the same instrument, her skin rippled with intense waves of color, and she quickly withdrew. Professor Karani, he asked carefully, why are you really collecting all these samples? Her silver eyes held his for a long moment. Curiosity, she finally said, isn't that why you're here as well? Something in her tone made Nate wonder if they were still talking about the research. And as the night deepened around them, he resolved that he would discover what secrets Professor Karani was truly keeping, no matter where that knowledge might lead. The Academy's curfew had long passed when Nate found himself crouching behind a row of crystalline storage units, watching Professor Karani through the gap between them. The biochemistry lab's blue emergency lights cast strange shadows across her tall form as she moved with deliberate precision. He hadn't planned on spying. After Fiona's warnings and his own growing suspicions, he'd merely intended to walk past the lab on his way back from the library. But seeing the secure door slightly ajar, soft indigo light spilling from within, he'd found himself drawn inside. Professor Karani stood before a complex array of equipment that definitely wasn't standard Academy issue. Her skin barely glowed now, just a faint shimmer of deep violet as she manipulated what appeared to be cellular structures on a three-dimensional molecular assembler. Nate shifted his weight, and a small storage container clinked against another. The sound, barely audible to his own ears, caused Professor Karani to freeze instantly. Her skin flashed with alarmed crimson pulses before darkening to near invisibility. I know you're there, she said, her melodic voice tight with tension. Show yourself. Nate stood, heart hammering against his ribs. It's just me, Professor. Her skin brightened with recognition, patterns swirling with complex emotions he couldn't interpret. Nate, what are you doing here at this hour? I could ask you the same thing, he said, stepping closer. This lab is restricted, planetary quarantine protocols. I have clearance, she replied smoothly, but her skin betrayed her, flashing with nervous amber at its edges. Without security escorts, Nate gestured to the equipment, with technology that isn't registered with the Academy. Professor Karani's posture changed subtly, less the approachable teacher, more the alien being from a world he could barely comprehend. You've been watching me. I've been curious, he corrected, like you said in the Arboretum. They stood in silence, the hum of the equipment between them until she finally sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. I didn't anticipate this level of observational skill from a first-year student. The patterns on her skin settled into a steady rhythm of deep blue, though perhaps I should have, given your performance in class. She gestured to a stool nearby. Since you're here, you might as well understand what you're seeing. Nate approached cautiously, taking the offered seat. Up close, he could see the molecular structure she was manipulating, Earth DNA intertwined with something utterly alien. The Alluvian Scientific Council has been studying Earth's biodiversity since first contact, she explained, adjusting the holographic display. Your planet contains genetic diversity unseen in any other world we've encountered. That doesn't explain the secrecy, Nate pointed out, or using the restricted lab after hours. Politics, she said, with a flicker of irritation across her skin. Your Academy administration restricts access to certain research parameters they deem sensitive. Her silver eyes met his, and for a moment, Nate felt as if he were falling into starlight. I'm not doing anything harmful, Nate. I'm cataloging genetic adaptations that could benefit both our species. Her voice softened. If I'd requested formal permission, I'd have been denied or restricted to the point of uselessness. Nate studied her face, trying to discern truth from deception. So you're what? A scientific rebel. The bioluminescent patterns across her skin suddenly shifted to that same bright magenta he'd seen before, then quickened into pulsing waves that seemed to radiate outward from her core. In a manner of speaking, she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. On Alluvia, I'm considered quite unorthodox in my methods. And what methods are those? Nate asked, aware that he was now sitting closer than any student should to their professor, alien or not. Professor Karani's hand moved to adjust the molecular display, brushing against his in the process. This time she didn't pull away. Her skin's luminescence intensified where they touched. Direct observation, engagement, immersion. Each word seemed weighted with double meaning. Some knowledge can only be gained through experience, don't you agree? Nate's mouth felt dry. Is that why you became a teacher here, for the experience? Initially, she admitted, but I've found the experience more affecting than anticipated. She reached out slowly, her slender fingers hovering near his face before gently brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Where she touched, a warmth lingered that had nothing to do with temperature. Your species fascinates me, Nate. Your adaptability, your emotions, your constant contradictions. The patterns on her skin formed spiraling nebulae of color, and you specifically have proven particularly fascinating. Professor, he began. Karani, she corrected softly. When we're alone, I am simply Karani. The air between them seemed charged with something beyond chemistry or biology, something neither of their species had scientific terminology to describe. Karani, he repeated, her name feeling both alien and intimate on his tongue. Whatever you're doing here, is it dangerous? Her expression grew serious, not intentionally, but knowledge always carries risk. A sudden alarm blared from her equipment. She turned quickly, severing the moment between them. Security protocols, someone else is approaching the lab. With fluid grace, she collapsed her equipment into an impossibly small case that disappeared into her robes. You should leave, now, through the secondary exit. What about you? I'll handle it, her skin dimmed to near darkness. But Nate, speak of this to no one for both our sakes. As he slipped through the side door, Nate couldn't stop thinking about the way her skin had glowed when they touched, like a star being born. Only later, lying awake in his dormitory, did he realize he never actually got an answer about what she was truly doing with those samples. And why, despite all reasonable caution, he was already planning to help her do more of it. Midterm examinations approached with the inevitability of a solar eclipse, casting long shadows of anxiety across the academy. Yet for Nate, academic concerns had become secondary to the mystery of Professor Karani's late-night research. For the past 2 weeks, he had assisted her openly with classroom preparations by day and secretly with her unauthorized experiments by night. They developed a routine that blurred the lines between student and teacher, human and alien, culminating in long conversations that stretched into the early morning hours. Tonight, they sat on the Academy rooftop observatory, surrounded by holographic displays of Karani's collected data. Earth's moon hung large in the sky, bathing them in silver light that complemented the gentle glow of her skin. The genetic sequencing is almost complete, she said, manipulating a strand of complex molecular coding in the air between them. Your assistance has accelerated my work by months. Nate studied her profile against the starry backdrop. You still haven't told me what all this research is really for. The patterns on her neck flickered with brief uncertainty. Does it matter? You enjoy the work. I enjoy being with you, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. But yes, it matters. Karani's hand stilled, the holographic DNA strand rotating slowly between them. For several heartbeats, she remained silent, her bioluminescence pulsing in slow, measured waves. My mission here is more complex than teaching xenobiology, she finally said. I figured that much, Nate gestured to the equipment around them. Are you going to tell me you're a spy? Industrial espionage, stealing Earth's biological secrets. Her silver eyes flashed with something like hurt. Is that what you believe? I don't know what to believe anymore. He moved closer, close enough to see the intricate patterns beneath her luminescence, like circuitry woven into living tissue. But I know there's more to this than academic curiosity. Karani sighed, a strangely human gesture she seemed to have adopted from her time on Earth. With a wave of her hand, she dismissed the genetic displays and brought up a new hologram, a planet with 3 moons, swirling with vibrant colors and massive storm systems. Alluvia, she said softly, my homeworld. The image zoomed in, revealing sprawling crystalline cities set amidst lush violet vegetation. Then it shifted, showing barren regions, dead zones spreading like wounds across the landscape. 2 decades ago, an unknown pathogen began affecting our ecosystem. It started slowly, just a few species of flora showing signs of decay. By the time our scientists recognized the pattern, it had become systemic. Her voice carried a depth of sorrow that transcended species. We're losing our world piece by piece. Nate stared at the hologram, understanding dawning. You're looking for a cure in Earth's biodiversity. Earth life has remarkable adaptive capabilities, resilience built into your very cellular structure. Karani's skin brightened with amber urgency. Your planet has survived multiple extinction events, yet life always recovers, adapts, continues. Mine may not be so fortunate. Why the secrecy? The Academy would support research like this. Her expression darkened, luminescent patterns turning a deep indigo. Not all on the Galactic Assembly view our situation with sympathy. Some see a weakened alluvia as politically advantageous, if certain factions discovered the extent of our vulnerability. They'd exploit it, Nate finished. Politics, it seemed, remained ugly regardless of the species involved. The official position is that Alluvian scientists are conducting routine cultural exchange, she continued. Nothing more. Nate processed this revelation, seeing her actions of the past weeks in a new light. The specimens you're collecting, you're testing their resistance to your world's pathogen, and their potential for integration into our ecosystem. She nodded, seemingly relieved that he understood. Your Earth plants have defense mechanisms we never evolved, if we can isolate and adapt those traits. The implications were enormous. Nate's mind raced through the ethical considerations, the scientific challenges, the potential consequences of transferring Earth genetic material to an alien ecosystem. This is way beyond anything the Academy would approve, he said slowly. Planetary biosecurity protocols exist for a reason. I know the risks, Karani insisted, her skin flashing with passionate crimson waves. I've taken every precaution to prevent cross-contamination, but my world is dying, Nate. Her hand reached for his, slender fingers intertwining with his own. Where they touched, her bioluminescence intensified to an almost blinding blue-white. In another time, another context, my people would approach yours openly through official channels, but bureaucracy moves slowly, and Alluvia doesn't have time for diplomatic pleasantries. Her grip tightened. I was sent because I'm both a scientist and a teacher, someone who could maintain a legitimate cover while conducting the necessary research. And what am I? Nate asked, suddenly feeling the weight of his involvement. Just a convenient assistant, a human lab rat to study. Karani's luminescence rippled with that unique magenta hue that seemed reserved only for him. You were unexpected, she said softly. An anomaly in my data, a variable I didn't account for. She released his hand to touch his face, her cool fingers tracing the contour of his jaw with careful precision, as if memorizing its shape. When two vastly different species interact, outcomes are rarely predictable. Nate knew he should pull away, should report her unauthorized research, should remember the professional boundaries between them. Instead, he leaned into her touch, drawn by something that defied rational explanation. If anyone discovers what you're doing, he began. They won't, she insisted, not if we're careful. The word we hung between them, heavy with implication. I won't pretend this isn't dangerous, Karani continued, or that I haven't compromised my professional ethics by involving you, but I believe the potential benefit outweighs the risk. Nate studied her alien features, so different yet somehow increasingly familiar to him. And what happens when you complete your research, when you found what you need? The patterns across her skin slowed, dimming slightly. I returned to Alluvia with my findings. The simple truth hit Nate with unexpected force. Of course she would leave. Earth was just a research site to her, the Academy just a cover. And he was, what exactly? As if sensing his thoughts, Karani's hand moved to rest over his heart. The universe rarely grants simple paths, Nate Harlow, but sometimes it provides worthy traveling companions, however brief the journey together may be. Under the watchful gaze of distant stars, Nate made his decision. Whether driven by his growing feelings for her, by scientific curiosity, or by simple human compassion for a dying world, he couldn't say. Tell me what you need me to do, he said. What neither of them realized, as they bent together over the holographic displays, was that they were no longer alone on the rooftop. In the shadows behind the observatory equipment, Fiona stood frozen, her phone recording everything, evidence of a conspiracy that would soon throw the entire academy into chaos. The academy's grand auditorium had never been so silent. Hundreds of students, faculty, and security personnel sat in stunned attendance as the emergency disciplinary hearing unfolded on the central platform. Professor Karani stood alone, her luminescence muted to barely visible pulses of deep blue. Across from her sat the Academy board, their expressions ranging from outrage to clinical curiosity. Between them lay the damning evidence. Karani's research equipment, confiscated samples, and Fiona's recording playing on a continuous loop. Nate sat in the front row, security officers flanking him. He'd been questioned for hours after the raid on the rooftop observatory but ultimately released, deemed a manipulated student rather than a willing accomplice. Chancellor Thornton, a stern woman whose reputation for upholding regulation was legendary, addressed the assembly. The violations committed by the Alluvian delegate Karani are unprecedented. Unauthorized collection of Earth biological materials, covert extraction of genetic sequences, planned exportation of protected biological information, all constitute severe breaches of the interspecies security protocol. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Marcus, seated nearby, leaned toward Nate. Can't believe she played us all, he whispered, using her alienness to distract us while she stole Earth secrets. Nate remained silent, his eyes fixed on Karani. Even now, facing disgrace and potential interstellar diplomatic consequences, she maintained her dignified posture. Only the subtle patterns of her skin revealed her distress to those who knew how to read them. Before we proceed with formal charges, Chancellor Thornton continued, the accused may address the board. Karani stepped forward, her silver eyes scanning the audience briefly before settling on Nate. The patterns across her skin shifted momentarily to that familiar magenta before returning to somber blue. I acknowledge my actions violated Academy protocols, she began, her melodic voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. But I reject the characterization of my research as theft or espionage. She activated a small device on her wrist. The central holographic display changed to show the same images of Alluvia she had shared with Nate, the spreading dead zones, the collapsing ecosystem. My homeworld is dying, she stated simply. The pathogen destroying our biosphere has proven resistant to all Alluvian science. We sought solutions across the galaxy, finding nothing until preliminary studies of Earth biology showed promise. The images shifted, showing laboratory simulations of Earth plant cells successfully resisting the Alluvian pathogen. I was sent here not to steal, but to research compatible organisms that might save an entire world. Yes, I circumvented your bureaucracy. Yes, I conducted unauthorized research, but I did so knowing that official channels would take years Alluvia doesn't have. Chancellor Thornton's expression remained impassive. Noble intentions do not justify protocol violations that could potentially introduce catastrophic cross-contamination between our worlds. I took every precaution, Karani began. You cannot guarantee the safety of such experimentation, the Chancellor interrupted, which is precisely why the protocols exist. Unable to remain silent any longer, Nate stood. Permission to address the board, he called out, ignoring the security officer's attempts to restrain him. Chancellor Thornton frowned. This is highly irregular, Mr. Harlow, but given your involvement, proceed. Nate moved to stand beside Karani, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes upon them. I've reviewed all of Professor Karani's research, he stated firmly. Her containment protocols exceed Academy standards, her methodologies are sound, and most importantly, her work could save an entire civilization. He turned to face the audience directly. We sit in climate-controlled comfort while another world suffers from a biological disaster not unlike those Earth has faced. If our positions were reversed, wouldn't we hope for assistance rather than bureaucratic obstruction? A murmur of consideration moved through the crowd. Emboldened, Nate continued. Professor Karani didn't come here to harm Earth or steal our biological heritage. She came seeking a mutual solution, one that could benefit both our worlds through scientific exchange. From the second row, Fiona stood, but she lied to everyone, used her position to conduct secret experiments. Because she knew how we'd react, Nate countered. With fear, suspicion, and exactly this kind of hearing. Look at how we're treating her now, like a criminal rather than a scientist trying to save her people. Chancellor Thornton raised her hand for silence. While your loyalty is admirable, Mr. Harlow, sentiment cannot override security concerns. Then address the security concerns properly, came a new voice. Dr. Elias, head of xenobiology, rose from his seat among the faculty. I've reviewed the confiscated research. Professor Karani's work is methodologically impeccable. With proper oversight, it could become a legitimate joint research initiative, the first of its kind between our worlds. The board members conferred quietly among themselves. Nate felt Karani's hand brush against his, her skin momentarily brightening where they touched. Your defense was unnecessary, she whispered, but appreciated. It was necessary, he responded quietly, and true. Chancellor Thornton cleared her throat. The board will recess to consider this matter. All parties will remain available for further questioning. As the board members filed out, the auditorium erupted into animated discussion. Karani turned to face Nate fully, her luminescence slowly shifting through colors he'd come to recognize as complex emotion. Why did you defend me, she asked, after learning I concealed my true purpose here? Because your true purpose matters, he replied, because saving a world matters more than regulations, and because, he hesitated, aware of the many ears around them. Because, she prompted, her skin pulsing with that now familiar magenta that seemed reserved solely for him. Before he could answer, a commotion at the auditorium entrance drew everyone's attention. A delegation of tall, luminescent beings entered, Illuvians, their ceremonial robes marking them as officials of high rank. The Illuvian Science Council, Karani breathed, her skin flashing with surprise. They weren't due to make contact for another month. The lead Illuvian approached Karani and Nate, his skin patterns communicating in rapid, complex sequences that Nate couldn't interpret. Karani responded in kind, her luminescence shifting through patterns too quick to follow. Finally, she turned to Nate. The council received warning of my situation. They've come to formally request a joint research initiative through proper diplomatic channels this time. Then your mission will continue but openly with full cooperation between our worlds. Her silver eyes seem to shine brighter. They're offering academic exchanges too, Earth students traveling to study on Illuvia, a true interspecies initiative. Hours later, after negotiations and explanations, after Chancellor Thornton reluctantly agreed to the diplomatic proposal, after the auditorium had emptied of all but a few stragglers, Nate and Karani found themselves alone in her classroom. So Nate said, perching on the edge of a desk, Professor Karani becomes a proper ambassador. And continues her research, she added, adjusting the classroom's molecular models with practiced grace. With full approval this time. And when it's complete, when you found your cure. Karani moved closer, her tall form graceful in the dim evening light. The council's proposal includes permanent exchange positions, Earth scientists on Illuvia, Illuvian researchers here. And teachers, Nate asked quietly. Her skin brightened with waves of magenta light. A brilliant student once told me that knowledge can only truly be gained through experience. Her slender fingers reached for his, intertwining as they had on the observatory rooftop. Where they touched, both felt the strange, impossible connection between two beings evolved on worlds light years apart. There is much our worlds can learn from each other, Nate Harlow, she said softly. And much I still wish to learn about you if you're willing to continue the lesson. As he pulled her closer, Nate realized that the most valuable education rarely happened in classrooms. It occurred in the spaces between worlds, in the connections formed across impossible distances, in the luminescent glow of understanding between two beings who had no business understanding each other at all. And yet somehow did. On the door of the classroom, a new sign had been placed that day. It no longer read Xenobiology. Instead, it announced the Academy's newest course. Interspecies Cooperation, Building Bridges Across Stars. The class, unsurprisingly, was already fully enrolled for next semester.